In the grim darkness of the far future, where the galaxy burns with the light of a billion wars, there exists a truth more terrible than any Xeno's blade or heretic's curse. The greatest enemy of mankind is not the chittering hordes that spill from hive ships, nor the demon spawn that crawl from warp rifts torn in reality's flesh. No, the most insidious foe dwells within the very vessels that house the human spirit, within flesh that betrays, bones that bend, and blood that runs poison through dying veins. The body is a battlefield, they whisper in the medici halls, though such words are spoken only in the darkest hours when even the servo-skulls have dimmed their recording eyes. For in the Imperium of Man, to be sick is to commit the gravest heresy, not against the Emperor's divinity, but against his demand for endless toil. Every wheeze is a prayer unanswered. Every fever is a failure of faith. Every trembling hand that cannot grip a last gun or work the assembly line becomes evidence of humanity's fundamental weakness. The irony cuts deeper than any chirurgeon's blade. In a universe where flesh is proclaimed sacred, where the human form is exalted as the Emperor's chosen vessel, that same flesh is condemned the moment it shows the slightest imperfection. The body becomes both temple and battlefield, worship and war fought in sinew and marrow. To fall ill is not merely to suffer, it is to betray 10,000 years of imperial doctrine that demands perfection from the fundamentally imperfect. Here, in the sprawling hive cities that stretch like concrete cancers across a million worlds, sickness takes on qualities that transcend mere biology. It becomes philosophy. It becomes politics. It becomes the ultimate test of loyalty to a god-emperor who sits silent upon his golden throne, neither blessing the faithful with health nor cursing the heretic with plague, but watching with dead eyes as his children waste away in their own frailty. The medici know this truth better than most. In their sterile chambers, surrounded by the hum of ancient life support systems and the acrid tang of counterseptic, they witness the daily contradiction of imperial faith. They are tasked with preserving life in a society that values it only as a resource to be expended. They heal flesh that will be sent to die in trenches. They mend bones that will be broken again on factory floors. They restore sight to eyes that will see horrors beyond comprehension. But routine never lasts in the Imperium. Even in the depths of suffering, where pain has become as common as prayer, change stirs like infection in an open wound. The weight of survival presses down upon the citizens of the Imperium with the crushing force of a Hablock's foundation settling into poisoned earth. In the underhive of Tertius Mortis, where the air itself carries the taste of industrial decay, workers begin each day knowing that their bodies are borrowed time. The recycled atmosphere burns their lungs with each breath, painting their sputum black as the void between stars. Yet still they rise. Still they labor. Still they pretend that the growing weakness in their limbs is merely fatigue, not the slow betrayal of flesh corrupted by a lifetime of toxins. Agrisurf Matthias Vogt has not stood straight in 7 years. His spine, bent from endless hours stooped over nutrient vats, curves like a question mark posed to an uncaring universe. The ache that radiates from his lower back has become his constant companion, more faithful than any friend, more persistent than any prayer. When he wakes in his narrow cot, the pain greets him with the reliability of the duty chimes that call the workers to their endless shift. When he sleeps, if the exhaustion allows him that mercy, the pain remains, weaving itself into his dreams like a thread of agony through a tapestry of despair. The medical dispensary in his sector closed 3 months ago. Budget reallocations, they called it. Efficiency improvements. The pain suppressants that once made his existence bearable now flow to more vital sectors. To the guard regiments preparing for deployment, to the noble houses whose comfort ensures continued cooperation with imperial decree. Matthias receives nothing but the assurance that his suffering serves the greater good, that his bent spine is a sacrifice upon the altar of humanity's survival. Aboard the merchant vessel Merciful Reprieve, Voidsman 3rd Class Jorik Hess counts the sores that bloom across his forearms like obscene flowers. The ship's complement of 15,000 souls shares recycling systems designed for 8,000. The food dispensers distribute protein bars that taste of rust and desperation. Scurvy is common. Malnutrition is expected. The sick bay closed permanently after the last apothecary died of the same wasting disease he'd been treating in others. But the ship's production quotas remain absolute. The cargo holds must be loaded and unloaded with mechanical precision. The plasma drives must be maintained regardless of how many technicians collapse at their posts. The bridge must be manned even if the officers sway from malnutrition and their orders slur through cracked lips. To suggest that illness might excuse reduced performance is to court charges of sedition. The commissar aboard the Merciful Reprieve has already made 3 examples this voyage. 3 crew members whose weakness was answered with bolt rounds to the skull. Captain Vex watches his crew deteriorate with the cold calculation of a man who has learned that compassion is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. Each day brings new reports of sickness, new requests for medical attention that cannot be provided, new pleas for reduced duty rosters that cannot be granted. His ship carries vital munitions to the Cadian Gate, where regiments wait for resupply while facing the horrors spewing from the Eye of Terror. If the Merciful Reprieve arrives late, if her cargo falls short of expectations, entire companies of Imperial Guard might die for want of ammunition. What is the suffering of 15,000 crew members weighed against the survival of millions of soldiers? What is individual pain measured against the Imperium's grand design? Captain Vex knows the answer because it has been beaten into his skull through decades of service. Nothing. Individual suffering means nothing. The machine must function, regardless of the cost to its components. Yet beneath the surface of enforced stoicism, something began to stir. Whispers carried on recycled air. Glances exchanged in the shadows between work shifts. Questions that dared not be spoken aloud, but flickered behind tired eyes like dying stars. In the depths of Hive Mortis, in the shadowed alleys between towering manufactorums, the whispers begin as all dangerous things do, quietly, carefully, passed from mouth to ear like contraband more precious than archaeotech. The rumors speak of disappearances, of families who report sick children to the local medici stations, only to never see those children again. Of elderly citizens who vanish in the night, leaving behind only empty beds and the lingering scent of counterseptic. Sick houses, they call them, though none can say precisely where these places exist or who operates them. Some claim they are hidden deep in the underhive, in forgotten chambers where the air itself crawls with plague. Others whisper that they exist in plain sight, disguised as normal medici facilities, their true purpose hidden behind bureaucratic doublespeak and administrative efficiency. Hardra Kolf lost her youngest son to a fever 3 weeks ago. At least, that is what the black-robed medici told her when they arrived at her hab unit. Little Tam had been burning with sickness for days, his small body racked with convulsions that no amount of prayer could ease. When the medici came, they examined him with instruments that hummed like angry wasps. They pronounced him suitable for specialized treatment and carried him away on a stretcher that looked more like a prison transport than medical equipment. That was 3 weeks ago. Hardra has received no word of her son's condition. Her inquiries to the local medici stations are met with blank stares and shuffled data slates. When she grows too insistent, when her maternal desperation overrides her survival instinct, she is warned by enforcers to cease her disruptive behavior or face criminal charges. But Hardra is not alone in her loss. In the cramped hab blocks of level 97, she finds others who speak in hushed tones of similar experiences. Marco Vess, whose wife disappeared after developing a persistent cough. Sister Althea, whose aged father was taken after his hands began to shake too violently to operate his assembly station. Dozens of stories, all following the same pattern: sickness, examination, removal, silence. The pattern emerges slowly, like a disease spreading through the population's consciousness. The sick are not being treated, they are being harvested. But for what purpose? The whispers offer no answers, only deeper questions that burrow into the mind like parasites seeking warmth. Some claim the disappeared are being used for medical experiments, their bodies dissected to understand the plagues that periodically sweep through the hive cities. Others believe they are being processed into the very medicine distributed to the wealthy, their suffering distilled into compounds that ease the pain of their betters. The most desperate whisper of darker purposes, that the sick are being fed to some unspeakable thing that dwells in the deep places of the hive, that their agony nourishes entities better left unnamed. But truth, in the Imperium, is a luxury reserved for those with the power to demand it. For the common citizens of Hive Mortis, there is only the growing certainty that sickness has become something more than mere affliction. It has become a doorway to oblivion, a path that leads not to healing but to erasure from the records of existence. The black-robed medici continue their nocturnal visits, their servo-skulls scanning for signs of weakness, their instruments detecting the telltale signatures of disease. They arrive without warning and depart without explanation, leaving behind only empty spaces where human beings once struggled against the inevitable decay of flesh. What seemed ordinary soon revealed its true horror, for in the Imperium of Man, even mercy has teeth, and healing comes at a price that few are prepared to pay. The apothecarian of St. Lucifer's mercy rises from the hive floor like a tombstone marking the grave of compassion itself. Its walls, once white as fresh bone, now bear the yellowish stains of centuries of suffering, streaked with rust-colored deposits that might be blood or might be the tears of 1,000,000 patients who entered seeking relief and found only systematic despair. Here, in halls that echo with the mechanical breathing of life support systems and the distant screams of those undergoing treatment, the Imperium's approach to medical care reveals itself in all its bureaucratic horror. This is not healing, this is triage on an industrial scale, where human beings are sorted like cargo according to their potential value to the state machine. Mago's biologist Vex Tertius moves through the facility's corridors with the clicking gait of one whose legs have been replaced by articulated steel. His face, what remains visible beneath the tangle of mechadendrites and augmetic sensors, bears the expression of a man who has long since ceased to see his patients as anything more than malfunctioning machinery in need of repair or disposal. In Ward 17, the poor receive their rations of recycled medicine, drugs that have been extracted from the bodies of previous patients, refined through processes that strip away efficacy along with expense. The coughing woman in bed 47B swallows pills that once attempted to cure someone else's pneumonia, their potency diminished through multiple extractions but still deemed adequate for low-priority patients by the facility's efficiency protocols. The man beside her, his arms gone black with some creeping rot, receives an augmetic replacement assembled from the salvaged parts of factory servitors. The procedure is performed without anesthetic, not from cruelty, but from simple economics. Pain suppressants are expensive. The patient screams cost nothing but time, and time is the one resource the apothecarian possesses in abundance. 3 floors above, in the private wings reserved for those whose noble blood grants them consideration, Medici Prime Collus tends to Lady Vex migraine with remedies that cost more than most citizens earn in a lifetime. Rare chems imported from distant worlds ease her discomfort while below, in the general wards, hundreds die for want of basic antibiotics. The lady's headache receives more medical attention than an entire hab block plagued with fever. But even Medici Prime Collus carries the weight of the system's fundamental corruption. His hands, steady as they inject priceless compounds into noble veins, shake when he thinks of the patients he cannot save. The children who die while he tends to aristocratic ennui. The soldiers who perish from infected wounds while he applies cosmetic treatments to cover the scars of those who have never seen battle. He has become what the Imperium requires of all its servants, a tool so specialized in its function that it cannot conceive of operating differently. To suggest that the poor deserve the same medicine as the rich would be heresy against the established order. To question why resources flow upward while suffering flows down would be treason against the very foundations of imperial society. The Medici themselves become casualties of the system they serve. Junior practitioner Thane has not slept more than 3 hours in any 24-hour period for the past 6 months. His hands tremble as he attempts to insert 4 lines. His eyes burn from the constant exposure to chemical disinfectants and the fluorescent glow of examination lumens. He makes mistakes, small ones at first, then increasingly dangerous errors as exhaustion erodes his judgment. But there is no relief for the healers any more than there is true healing for the sick. The Medici stations operate on the same brutal efficiency that drives every aspect of imperial life. Personnel are expendable. Compassion is a liability. The only metric that matters is throughput. How many bodies can be processed? How many can be returned to productive labor? How many can be disposed of without creating administrative complications? In the deep levels of the apothecarian, where the air hangs thick with the stench of decay and disinfectant, the truly hopeless cases await their final processing. These are not patients in any meaningful sense. They are biological waste, their flesh too corrupted for useful augmentation, their minds too far gone for reconditioning. They exist in a liminal state between life and death, sustained by machines not out of mercy but because their suffering generates useful data for the facility's research protocols. The apothecarian's primary function is not healing but conversion, transforming sick flesh into useful machinery, suffering into productivity, hope into compliance. The message echoes through every corridor, whispered by the servoskulls that monitor the wards. Weakness is criminal, compassion is sedition, and in the end, all flesh is merely raw material for the Imperium's endless hunger. Yet even here, in this monument to systematized cruelty, change lurks like infection in sterile spaces. Authority is coming, its boots echoing on metal floors with the rhythm of inevitable judgment. The voxcasters crackle to life with the harsh static that precedes all Imperial announcements, that burst of electronic discord that makes even the dying turn their heads toward the speakers mounted like watchful eyes throughout the Medici facility. When the static clears, the voice that emerges carries the cold authority of absolute law, each word enunciated with the precision of a bolt round fired from an Arbite's shock maul. Citizens of Hive Mortis, level 97 through 34. By order of Judge Arbitrator Vex Magnus of the Adeptus Arbites, all medical excuses for failure to meet production quotas are hereby declared null and void. Sickness is not an acceptable reason for dereliction of duty. Pain is not grounds for reduced output. Death is the only release from service to the Emperor's will. The announcement continues, but its content becomes secondary to its implications. In the Medici wards, patients who had dared to hope that their suffering might excuse them from the grinding wheels of imperial production realize that even here, even in their extremity, they are not safe from the machine's demands. Arbitrator Gast leads the enforcement squad through the facility's corridors with the methodical precision of a man executing a well-rehearsed routine. His power armor bears the scorch marks of recent enforcement actions, and his shock maul still carries traces of blood from the morning's compliance procedures. Behind him march 6 Arbites troopers, their weapons ready, their faces hidden behind riot helmets that reflect the sterile lighting like blank, metallic skulls. They move from ward to ward, data slates in hand, cross-referencing patient records with production reports from the various workstations throughout the hive. Their logic is brutally simple. If a citizen can breathe, they can work. If they can work, failure to do so constitutes criminal negligence. The severity of their illness is irrelevant. What matters is their continued utility to the state. In Ward 23, they find Marcus Kolf attempting to hide beneath his thin medici blanket, his body racked with fever that has left him delirious for the past week. The Arbites drag him from his bed with the efficiency of long practice, their gauntlets leaving bruises on his arms as they pull him upright. His protests, weak as the mewling of a wounded animal, are met with the crackling discharge of a shock maul against his ribs. Marcus Kolf, Worker Classification 779, Arbitrator Gast reads from his data slate, his voice carrying no more emotion than a servoskull reciting inventory statistics. 17 days absent from Assembly Station Theta 9. Production shortfall, 47 units below quota. Penalty, immediate return to duty or summary execution for willful sabotage of Imperial production. The Medici attempt to intervene, their oaths compelling them to protect their patients even in the face of overwhelming authority. Medici Thane steps forward, his exhausted face pale but determined. Arbitrator, this man's fever registers at 42 degrees. He cannot maintain consciousness for more than a few minutes. Forcing him to work will result in... The shock maul catches him across the temple before he can finish the sentence. Thane crumples to the floor, blood seeping from the wound in his scalp, while the other Medici watch in horror. The message is clear: medical opinion is subordinate to imperial law. The authority of healing means nothing when weighed against the authority of the state. Medical opinion noted and disregarded, Gast announces to the ward, his voice carrying to every bed, every corner where the sick and dying listen in growing terror. The Imperium does not recognize sickness as grounds for shirking duty. Those who claim illness as an excuse for reduced productivity are malingerers and saboteurs. The penalty for sabotage is death. Marcus Kolf is dragged from the ward, his fever-weakened legs unable to support his weight, leaving a trail of sweat and desperation on the floor behind him. The other patients watch in silence, understanding that their illnesses, their pain, their proximity to death mean nothing to the machine that devours their lives. They are not human beings deserving of compassion. They are components that have failed to function properly, and failed components are either repaired or discarded. The enforcement squad moves through the facility like a plague of official brutality, extracting patients from their beds, checking names against lists, determining who among the sick and dying can still serve the Imperium's endless appetite for human labor. Those deemed capable of limited duty are shackled and marched toward transport vehicles that wait outside. Those considered too far gone are marked for administrative processing, a euphemism that chills the blood of everyone who hears it. But the cruelest punishment is reserved for those who dare to resist. When Sister Althea rises from her bed, her arthritic joints screaming in protest, and declares that she would rather die than return to the manufactorum that poisoned her lungs, Arbitrator Gast grants her wish with cold efficiency. The bolt pistol's report echoes through the ward like a thunderclap of absolute authority. Sister Althea's body collapses across her bed, her blood spreading across the white sheets like a flowering accusation against the system that killed her. The other patients stare at her corpse, understanding that this is their future, not healing, not recovery, but compliance or death. Yet even as authority speaks in the language of violence and blood, other voices begin to whisper in the darkness, offering different kinds of mercy, different forms of salvation. The whispers begin in the spaces between screams, in the dark hours when even the Medici stations dim their lumens to conserve power. They seep through the recycled air like spores seeking fertile ground, carrying promises that sound too good to be true and too tempting to ignore. In the deepest wards, where the hopeless cases lie forgotten by official medicine, words are spoken that should not be uttered, prayers offered to powers that lurk beyond the Emperor's light. Grandfather loves you. comes the whisper from the bed beside the dying woman. He loves your pain. He loves your decay. He will make it all stop hurting. The voice belongs to Jenna Hawkes, who entered the Medici facility 3 weeks ago with nothing more than a persistent cough. Now, something fundamental has changed in her. Her skin has taken on a waxy, greenish pallor, and her eyes hold depths that seem to swirl with possibilities that medical science cannot explain. When she speaks of the grandfather, her voice carries harmonics that resonate in frequencies the human ear was never meant to detect. The Emperor promises you eternal service, she continues, her words barely audible above the hum of life support systems. Grandfather promises you eternal rest. The Emperor demands your pain as tribute. Grandfather transforms pain into peace. Around her, the dying listen with the desperate attention of those who have exhausted all other options. The Medici have abandoned them. The authorities have marked them for disposal. Even their families have stopped visiting, unwilling to be associated with failure on such a scale. But here, in the voice of this transformed woman, they hear something they had almost forgotten existed: hope. Not the false hope of the Imperial Creed, which promises reward only after death and service. Not the empty hope of medical treatment that never comes, supplies that are always allocated elsewhere. This is hope that offers immediate relief, acceptance of weakness rather than punishment for it, love for decay rather than disgust at imperfection. The transformation spreads slowly, carefully, like a gentle plague that asks for invitation rather than forcing entry. Those who listen to Jenna's whispers find their pain begins to change. The agony remains, but its character shifts, becoming something almost pleasurable, a sensation that connects them to something vast and benevolent rather than isolating them in personal suffering. Korvek the Burned, whose flesh was seared by acid in an industrial accident, discovers that his scars no longer throb with constant fire. Instead, they pulse with a rhythm that matches his heartbeat, and in that pulsing he hears the echo of a cosmic heartbeat, the slow breath of something impossibly ancient and patient. His destroyed face, which once filled him with shame, becomes a badge of honor, proof that he has suffered enough to earn the attention of a god who values suffering above all else. Maria Vox finds that the tumor growing in her spine no longer feels like an invasion of foreign tissue. Instead, it becomes a gift, a slow transformation that will eventually free her from the prison of individual consciousness and unite her with something greater than herself. The paralysis that spreads through her legs is not disability but transition, each lost sensation bringing her closer to a state of being that transcends the need for mobility, for independence, for all the burdens of individual existence. But the whispers carry more than comfort, they carry instruction. The faithful learn that their suffering has purpose beyond endurance. They are not merely victims of cosmic indifference but chosen vessels for a god's love. Their diseases are not random biological failures but sacred transformations, signs of divine favor that the ignorant mistake for curse. In the deeper wards, where official oversight grows thin, the whispers organize themselves into ritual. The faithful gather in circles around the dying, their hands joined, their voices raised in harmonies that sound like plague hymns. They share bodily fluids as communion, blood, pus, tears, each exchange strengthening their connection to the grandfather's boundless love. They speak of joy in decay, of beauty in decomposition, of the perfect peace that comes when the flesh finally abandons its futile struggle against entropy. The medical staff begin to notice changes they cannot explain through conventional diagnosis. Patients who should be dying linger in states of prolonged decay, their bodies breaking down in patterns that follow no known pathology. Others disappear entirely, their beds found empty in the morning, no sign of struggle or forced removal, as though they had simply dissolved into the recycled air. But the most disturbing change is in the attitude of the affected patients. Those touched by the whispers no longer beg for medicine, no longer scream from pain, no longer weep for the lives they are losing. Instead, they watch the medici with eyes that hold pity, not for themselves, but for those who still struggle against the inevitable decay of flesh. They smile at their caregivers with expressions of profound sadness, as though they understand secrets too terrible and too beautiful to share with the unenlightened. The infection spreads not through contact or airborne transmission, but through despair itself. Each act of medical cruelty, each bureaucratic indifference, each moment when hope dies in a patient's heart becomes an opening for the whispers to enter. The Imperium's systematic destruction of compassion creates the very conditions that allow other forms of mercy to take root. Yet something darker still approaches, for when the institutions of healing become instruments of oppression, when the very concept of medical care becomes weaponized against the weak, the body politic itself begins to show symptoms of a deeper sickness. The plague protocols engage with the mechanical precision of a weapons system acquiring its target. Across Hive Mortis, blast doors slam shut with the finality of tomb seals, their adamantium bulk separating the infected sectors from the supposedly clean zones above. The sound echoes through the hab blocks like the death knell of a massive bell, each resonant clang marking another district sealed off from hope. Marshal Vex Primus stands in the command bunker carved from solid rockcrete 3 kilometers below the Hive's foundation, surrounded by pick screens that display the spreading contamination like a three-dimensional map of damnation. Each red zone represents thousands of citizens, workers, children, elderly, sick, all now classified as acceptable losses in the war against whatever plague has taken root in the medical facilities of Level 97. Orbital bombardment remains an option, reports Colonel Hask, his augmetic eye whirring as it processes the tactical data streaming across the command displays. We could sterilize the entire sector with cyclonic torpedoes. Clean, efficient, permanent. But Marshal Vex Primus understands that such solutions carry their own costs. The workers in those sealed sectors represent significant industrial capacity. The hab blocks contain manufacturing equipment worth billions of thrown gelt. More importantly, orbital bombardment would require explanations to the planetary governor, reports to the sector command, investigations that might reveal uncomfortable truths about resource allocation and medical negligence. No, the Marshal decides, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We contain and sterilize through conventional means. The 47th Mordian will handle internal cleansing operations. Rules of engagement are simple. Anything that moves in the infected zones is to be considered hostile. The orders propagate through the military hierarchy with the speed of bad news, reaching the regimental commanders within minutes of the Marshal's decision. By the time the first Chimera APCs begin their descent into the sealed sectors, the soldiers inside understand their mission with crystal clarity. They are not conducting a rescue operation but an extermination. Lieutenant Voss checks his Lazarofal's power pack for the third time as his squad's transport descends through the Hive's levels toward the quarantine zone. Around him, his men perform the same ritual preparations they would before any combat operation. Checking equipment, reviewing tactical procedures, offering prayers to the Emperor for strength in battle. But there is something different about this mission, a quality that sits uneasily in their minds like grit in fine machinery. They are not marching against Xeno's invaders or heretic rebels. They are being sent to kill Imperial citizens whose only crime is falling ill in a system that cannot afford to treat them properly. The enemy they face is not foreign invasion but domestic failure, not alien corruption but the predictable consequences of decades of medical neglect and bureaucratic indifference. When the transport doors hiss open, the smell hits them first, the sweet sick odor of decay mingled with disinfectant, the metallic tang of spilled blood, and underneath it all, something else, something organic and wrong that makes their trained instincts scream warnings. The air itself seems thick, almost viscous, as though they are breathing liquid rather than gas. The hab blocks stretch before them like a maze constructed from despair and reinforced with desperation. Emergency lumens cast everything in hellish red shadows that dance and flicker with each movement. In the distance, they can hear sounds that might be human voices or might be something else entirely. Wailing, chanting, sounds of ecstasy mixed with agony in combinations that defy classification. The first contact comes not with the crack of gunfire but with the appearance of civilians who should be running from the soldiers but instead approach them with arms outstretched, faces bearing expressions of beatific joy. These are not the desperate survivors they expected to find, but something else, something transformed by whatever plague has taken root in the sealed sectors. "Please," whispers an old woman whose skin appears to be slowly melting from her bones, "let us share our joy with you. Grandfather has shown us such wonders. Such beautiful decay. Such perfect peace." Lieutenant Voss's training takes over. The last rifle discharges with its characteristic whine, the energy beam punching through the woman's chest and dropping her to the metal decking. But even as she dies, her face maintains that expression of transcendent happiness, and her last words are not curses but blessings offered to her killers. The pattern repeats throughout the sector. The plague victims do not resist the soldiers, they welcome them. They speak of love and acceptance even as last bolts tear through their transformed flesh. They reach out with hands that weep pus and blood, offering embraces that would spread whatever contagion has claimed them, speaking in voices that harmonize in frequencies that make the soldiers' teeth ache. But the most disturbing encounters are with the children. In a sealed Medici station on level 83, Sergeant Kane's squad discovers a nursery ward where dozens of sick children should have been quarantined. Instead, they find a garden of flesh, small bodies that have grown together in patterns that suggest intentional cultivation, their faces peaceful, their breathing synchronized, their soft voices singing lullabies in languages that predate human speech. The children watch the soldiers with eyes that hold ancient wisdom, speaking in unison, "We don't hurt anymore. We don't cry anymore. Grandfather loves us just as we are. Why won't you let him love you too?" Sergeant Kane's flamer purges the ward with promethium fire, but the sound of his men vomiting inside their helmets tells him that some stains cannot be cleansed by flame alone. The children do not scream as they burn, they continue singing until the fire takes their voices, and even then, the melody seems to linger in the smoke. The cleansing operation continues for 72 hours, but it becomes clear that what they face is not simply disease but something that has transformed the very concept of sickness into a form of worship. The plague victims have not been killed by their ailments, they have been reborn through them, converted into something that finds joy in decay, peace in putrefaction, love in the very processes that should inspire only horror. Yet even as the soldiers advance through the infected zones, their flamers cleansing and their last weapons purging, they begin to feel the weight of their actions. They are not heroes saving the Imperium from contamination. They are executioners destroying the evidence of the system's failures. Each body they burn, each family they exterminate, each child they reduce to ash becomes testimony to a truth too terrible to acknowledge, that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, and sometimes salvation comes wearing the face of the very thing you've been taught to fear. Among the echoing reports of gunfire and the roar of flames, a different kind of voice begins to emerge, not from the dying, but from the living. The voice of someone who has seen too much, who understands too clearly the mechanics of the machinery they serve. In the aftermath of purging flames and the settling silence that follows mass extermination, Medici Prime Colus sits alone in his private chambers, staring at hands that have failed more patients than they have saved. The amber liquid in his glass, Amasek imported at ruinous expense from distant Talon, burns his throat, but the pain is welcome. It is honest pain, chosen pain, unlike the suffering he has been forced to witness and enable throughout his career. The data slate on his desk displays the official casualty reports from the quarantine zones, 47,000 citizens processed through cleansing operations. No mention of the children singing as they burned. No record of the families who died holding each other, their final moments filled with a peace that proper imperial medicine had never been able to provide. No acknowledgement that perhaps, in their transformation, they had found something that the Imperium's cold efficiency could never offer. Koluz has served the Medici Corps for 37 years. He has watched plagues sweep through hive cities while medicine flowed to the wealthy. He has performed surgery on nobles' pet groks while soldiers died from infected wounds in the corridors outside his chambers. He has filled out requisition forms for cosmetic treatments while children wasted away from preventable diseases, their parents too poor to afford the basic antibiotics that cost less than a single dose of the anti-aging compounds he injects into aristocratic veins. "We are not healers," he speaks to the empty room, his words slurring slightly from the Amasek. "We are sorters. We sort the valuable from the expendable, the useful from the burdensome. We have forgotten what it means to heal because the Imperium has no use for healing, only for maintenance of productive capacity." The irony cuts deeper than any scalpel he has ever wielded. In a galaxy where medical technology can regrow limbs, where augmetic implants can grant superhuman strength, where the wealthy can purchase centuries of extended life, the majority of humanity suffers from ailments that could be cured with medicines that cost less than the daily rations fed to a single servitor. The Imperium possesses the knowledge and resources to eliminate most human suffering, but doing so would disrupt the careful hierarchies that keep the machine of state functioning. Pain serves a purpose in imperial society. It reminds the masses of their place. It motivates productivity through desperation. It ensures that comfort remains a privilege rather than a right, something to be earned through service rather than granted through compassion. A citizenry free from suffering might begin to ask uncomfortable questions about why they suffer in the first place. Koluz remembers the moment his faith in the system began to crack. It was during the feast of the Emperor's Ascension 3 years ago, when Lady Vex had summoned him to treat her daughter's mild fever. The girl, no more than 12 years old, lay in a bed that cost more than most citizens earned in a lifetime, surrounded by medical equipment that could have sustained an entire ward of dying patients. Her illness was minor, a simple viral infection that would resolve itself in days. But as Koluz administered expensive antivirals and monitored her recovery with instruments worth a fortune, he could not stop thinking about the children in the lower hives, the ones dying from similar infections while he lavished resources on a patient who would recover without any treatment at all. The girl's fever broke within hours. She was back to her lessons the next day, her brief illness already forgotten. That same week, Koluz had filed 17 death certificates for children whose fevers had killed them for want of the same medicine he had wasted on noble comfort. The guilt had been eating at him ever since, growing like a tumor in his conscience. He began to understand that his position in the medical hierarchy made him complicit in a system designed to perpetuate suffering rather than alleviate it. Every noble he treated meant dozens of common citizens who received no treatment at all. Every expensive procedure he performed on the wealthy meant hundreds of simple treatments that went undone in the lower levels. But perhaps the most crushing realization was that the system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. The suffering was not an unfortunate side effect of resource scarcity, but a deliberate feature of imperial social engineering. The pain served the machine. The death maintained the balance. The desperation ensured compliance. "They found something we could never give them," Koluz continues, his words now addressed to the empty Amasek bottle. "Acceptance. Love for what they were, not demands to be something else. We offer them nothing but judgment and efficiency. We tell them their pain is weakness, their sickness is failure, their mortality is betrayal of imperial expectations." He thinks of Jenna Hawks, the patient who had begun the transformation in the Medici facility. Her medical records showed a simple respiratory infection, easily treatable if resources had been available. Instead, she had been left to worsen while expensive treatments flowed to patients whose conditions were far less severe but whose social status demanded immediate attention. In her desperation, she had found something else. Something that promised her value not despite her sickness but because of it. Something that told her that her suffering mattered, that her decay was beautiful, that her failing flesh was worthy of love rather than disgust. It was a lie, of course. Kolus understood the nature of chaos corruption, the false promises that led to damnation. But was it really so different from the lies the Imperium told? The promise that suffering served the Emperor's will? The assurance that pain was necessary for salvation? The guarantee that death in service would be rewarded in some theoretical afterlife? At least the plague god offered immediate relief, tangible transformation, love that could be felt rather than merely hoped for. Kolus reaches for another bottle of Amasek, his movements clumsy with exhaustion and alcohol. Outside his chambers, the Medici facility continues its grinding operation. Patients sorted by wealth, treatments allocated by social status, compassion rationed like ammunition in a siege. The machine functions with perfect efficiency, producing exactly the outcomes it was designed to create. A population grateful for any relief from suffering, no matter what form that relief might take. The greatest tragedy is not that the plague had taken root in the medical facility, but that it had been necessary in the first place. The Imperium's systematic cruelty had created the very conditions that made chaos seem merciful by comparison. Every act of medical negligence, every patient abandoned to die for economic reasons, every moment when bureaucratic efficiency overrode human compassion became an invitation to something that promised better alternatives. "We did this," Kolus whispers to the darkness. "We created the desperation that made their lies seem like truth. We made suffering so universal that even corruption began to look like salvation." But his voice is lost in the vast machinery of the Hive, another confession swallowed by the indifferent silence that answers all such realizations in the Imperium of Man. The ecclesiarchy's response arrives with the ponderous weight of absolute spiritual authority. High Confessor Matthias Dorn processes through the charred remains of the quarantine zone surrounded by a retinue of skull-faced cherubim, their wings beating the air with mechanical precision as they broadcast hymns of purification through vox speakers embedded in their brass throats. His power armor, blessed by a dozen saints and inscribed with prayers in High Gothic, gleams with sacred oils that promise to repel any taint of corruption. Behind him march 100 battle sisters of the Order of the Cleansed Wound, their faces hidden behind masks of polished bone, their weapons loaded with blessed ammunition that has been sanctified through rituals dating back to the founding of the Imperium. They move through the devastated hab blocks like angels of judgment, their footsteps echoing with the weight of divine authority. But the High Confessor's sermon, broadcast through every voxcaster in the Hive, carries a message that chills the hearts of the faithful more deeply than any plague ever could. Citizens of Hive Mortis, his voice booms across the levels, each word carefully modulated to carry the full weight of ecclesiastical judgment. The corruption that has been purged from your midst was not random. It was not accidental. It was punishment, divine retribution for spiritual weakness that has festered among you like rot in poorly maintained machinery. The implication hangs in the recycled air like a toxic cloud. The plague, the transformations, the deaths of 47,000 citizens, all of it is being reframed not as the consequence of systemic neglect but as evidence of moral failure among the victims themselves. The sick had not suffered from disease but from insufficient faith. The dying had not needed medicine but more fervent prayer. The God Emperor tests his servants. Confessor Dawn continues, his words carrying to every corner of the Hive through speakers that cannot be turned off, cannot be ignored. He sends affliction to burn away weakness, to separate the pure from the corrupt, to identify those whose faith burns bright enough to sustain them through any trial. Those who succumbed to the whispers of false gods revealed the emptiness of their devotion. They chose corruption over endurance, lies over truth, momentary ease over eternal service. In the sealed Medici wards, patients who had survived the purges listened to these words with growing despair. They understand the message being conveyed. Their illness is not misfortune but moral failure. Their pain is not something to be treated but something to be endured as proof of their worthiness. To seek relief, to desire healing, to hope for anything beyond perpetual suffering becomes evidence of spiritual weakness. Sister Agatha, whose lungs have been scarred by industrial toxins until each breath feels like drowning in acid, presses her face against the thin pillow and tries to muffle her coughing. The sound might be interpreted as complaint, as insufficient acceptance of the Emperor's will. Around her, other patients lie in enforced silence, their suffering become performance, their pain transformed into displays of faith. The confessor's retinue moves through the facility with the methodical precision of inquisitors seeking heresy. They interview Medici staff, questioning their dedication to the Emperor's will. They examine patient records, looking for evidence of insufficient spiritual guidance in treatment protocols. They scrutinize the facility's prayer schedules, the frequency of spiritual counseling, the adequacy of religious instruction provided to the sick and dying. Pain is the Emperor's gift, declares Sister Superior Cassia as she addresses the assembled Medici staff. It refines the soul, purifies the spirit, separates the wheat from the chaff. Your role is not to eliminate suffering but to help the faithful understand its sacred purpose. Medicine that removes pain without strengthening faith is worse than useless. It is heretical. The new protocols that emerge from the Ecclesiarchy's investigation transform the Medici facility into something resembling a monastery more than a hospital. Treatment schedules are organized around prayer times. Patients must demonstrate appropriate levels of devotion before receiving even basic care. Pain medication is administered only to those who can recite lengthy passages from the Imperial Creed while their bodies burn with fever. But the cruelest innovation is the introduction of spiritual triage, the classification of patients not by the severity of their medical conditions but by the strength of their faith. Those judged sufficiently devout receive priority treatment, while those whose piety is found wanting are relegated to prayer therapy, essentially abandonment with religious justification. Medici Thane, still bearing the scar from his encounter with the Arbite's shock maul, finds himself conducting theological examinations instead of medical diagnoses. He must determine not whether a patient needs antibiotics, but whether they deserve them based on their spiritual worthiness. The oath he swore to preserve life has been subordinated to the requirement to preserve souls, even if that preservation requires the destruction of the flesh. "Sister, please," whispers young Marcus Holt, his body racked with fever from an infection that could be cured with a single injection of readily available antibiotics. "I pray every day. I serve the Emperor faithfully. Please, just a little medicine." But Sister Cassia shakes her head with the cold certainty of absolute faith. "Your suffering is a test, child. The Emperor watches to see if you will endure, or if you will break. Medicine would rob you of the opportunity to prove your devotion. Pray harder. Suffer better. Show him that your faith burns brighter than your pain." Marcus dies 3 days later, his last words a desperate recitation of prayers he had memorized in the hope that sufficient devotion might earn him relief. His death certificate lists the cause as spiritual completion rather than systemic infection. His body is processed through the facility's crematorium, his ashes blessed and scattered in the wind with those of thousands of others who had been deemed worthy of suffering. The transformation of medical care into religious trial spreads throughout the Hive like a different kind of plague. Medici facilities become shrines to endurance rather than healing. The sick are no longer patients but penitents, their illnesses reframed as opportunities for spiritual growth rather than biological malfunctions requiring treatment. But in the silence between prayers, in the spaces where even the omnipresent voxcasters cannot reach, a different kind of whisper begins to emerge. Not the promises of false gods, but the quiet desperation of those who understand that they have been abandoned not just by medicine, but by the very faith that claims to offer them salvation. The God Emperor's silence becomes deafening in its implications. If their suffering truly serves his will, why does he not acknowledge their devotion? If their pain refines their souls, why does it feel so empty, so meaningless, so utterly without purpose or end? If their faith is being tested, why does passing the test bring nothing but more tests, each one more brutal than the last? In the deepest levels of the hive, where the recycled air tastes of despair and the walls weep condensation that might be tears, the faithful begin to understand that their God may not be listening at all. Yet even as this realization spreads like a slow poison through the population's consciousness, the machinery of control continues to function with perfect efficiency, grinding human suffering into the raw material of compliance, transforming hope into submission, converting the desire for healing into acceptance of endless pain. And in that grinding machinery, something else begins to move, not corruption from without, but collapse from within. The end comes not with the dramatic flourish of orbital bombardment or the heroic sacrifice of last stands, but with the quiet efficiency of administrative decision-making. In a bunker 5 kilometers beneath the hive's foundation, Planetary Governor Vex Septimus reviews the quarterly reports with the detached interest of a man examining livestock mortality statistics. The data scrolls across his personal cogitator in neat columns of statistics that reduce human suffering to manageable abstractions. Productivity indices for the infected sectors have fallen below acceptable thresholds. Medical costs have exceeded allocated budgets by 347%. The cleansing operations, while successful in containing the corruption, have eliminated significant industrial capacity along with the corrupted population. Most importantly, the incident has attracted unwanted attention from sector command. Questions are being asked about resource allocation, medical protocols, and the circumstances that allowed chaos corruption to take root in an imperial facility. The governor's carefully maintained reputation for efficient administration is beginning to show stress fractures. The solution is evident, declares Administratum Logis Primus Thane, his augmetic fingers clicking across his data slate with mechanical precision. We implement Protocol 77 Alpha, complete sectoral redevelopment. The affected areas are designated as structurally unsound due to combat damage. The population is relocated to more suitable accommodations. The zones are sealed and eventually demolished to make room for more efficient industrial development. The euphemisms flow like honey over the bitter reality beneath. Relocation means transportation to forced labor camps on distant worlds. More suitable accommodations refers to barracks designed for maximum occupancy and minimum cost. Structural unsoundness describes the convenient fiction that will erase any record of what actually transpired in the quarantine zones. But the most elegant aspect of Protocol 77 Alpha is its treatment of historical documentation. All medical records from the affected facilities are classified as corrupted data and scheduled for deletion. The Medici staff who witnessed the events are reassigned to distant postings where their testimony would be irrelevant. The military personnel who conducted the cleansing operations receive memory adjustment procedures that will blur the details of what they experienced. Within 6 months, the official record will show only that certain sectors of Hive Mortis were renovated to improve industrial efficiency. The 47,000 deaths will become 47,000 transfers to other facilities. The plague outbreak will become routine maintenance. The corruption will become architectural obsolescence. Marshal Vex Primus oversees the final phase of the operation from his command bunker, watching as massive industrial servitors begin the work of sealing the abandoned sections. Plasteel barriers, 3 meters thick and reinforced with adamantium mesh, are welded into place across corridors where families once lived, where children once played, where the desperate once whispered prayers to gods who promised relief from pain. The barriers are not intended to keep anything out, they are designed to keep memories in. Behind those walls, the evidence of systemic failure will decay into dust, along with any trace of the citizens who paid the price for that failure. Future generations will walk above those sealed sections without knowing what lies beneath their feet, without understanding the price paid for their ignorance. Scribe Servitor Tertius 9 processes the final documentation with a mechanical efficiency that characterizes all servitor labor. Its lobotomized brain cannot comprehend the significance of the words it transcribes, cannot understand that it is writing obituaries for an entire population, death certificates for hope itself. The final report is filed in archives so deep and so classified that accessing them would require authorization from the High Lords of Terror themselves. But even as the official record is sanitized and sealed, traces of truth linger in places the administratum cannot reach. In the dreams of survivors who remember the whispered promises of false gods. In the nightmares of soldiers who recall the sound of children singing as they burned. In the guilt of Medici staff who understand that their healing hands became instruments of selection and abandonment. Medici Prime Collus does not survive the memory adjustment procedures. His guilt has eaten too deeply into his psyche, creating neural pathways too complex for even the Imperium's mind-scrubbing technology to safely navigate. He dies on the surgical table, his last words lost in the hiss of life support systems shutting down. His death is recorded as complications during routine mental health treatment. High Confessor Dawn delivers a final sermon to the remaining population of Hive Mortis, his words broadcast through voxcasters that carry his message to every hab block, every workstation, every corner where human beings struggle to survive another day in service to the Golden Throne. Citizens, his voice booms with the authority of absolute faith. You have witnessed the Emperor's judgment upon those whose faith proved insufficient. Take this lesson to heart. Suffering is not your enemy but your teacher. Pain is not your burden but your privilege. To be tested by hardship is to be noticed by the divine. Cherish your afflictions, for they prove your worth in his sight. The sermon continues for 3 hours, but its essential message can be summarized in a single sentence. The system that created your suffering is sacred, and questioning that system is heresy. The medicine that could heal you is withheld not through cruelty but through divine wisdom. The pain that consumes your days serves a purpose too profound for mortal minds to comprehend. And in the end, when the voxcasters fall silent and the population returns to their duties, nothing has changed. The Medici facilities continue to sort patients by wealth rather than need. The powerful receive treatments that the weak can only dream of. Children die from preventable diseases while their parents watch in helpless desperation. The only difference is that now, even the acknowledgement of this injustice has been redefined as spiritual failure. To question why healing is rationed is to doubt the Emperor's plan. To desire relief from suffering is to reveal weakness of faith. To hope for better treatment is to commit the heresy of expecting mercy from a universe designed to test your endurance. In the deepest archives, where the official reports gather dust behind locks that will never be opened, the truth waits in silence. 47,000 citizens died not from plague but from abandonment. Not from corruption but from a system so focused on efficiency that it forgot the purpose efficiency was meant to serve. Not from the whispers of false gods but from the silence of a true one who demands suffering but offers no comfort, requires faith but provides no hope, commands obedience but grants no reward beyond the privilege of continued obedience. The ashes of the incurable drift on the recycled air of the hive, invisible particles that settle into the lungs of the living, carrying with them the chemical memory of dreams deferred and hopes incinerated. In the end, they become part of the very atmosphere the survivors breathe, a communion of dust and despair that links the dead with the dying in ways that transcend the barriers erected by authority and faith. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the greatest battles are not fought between armies but between the desire to live and the requirement to serve, between the need for healing and the demand for compliance, between the cry for mercy and the silence that answers all such cries with the same eternal response. Your suffering is necessary, your pain is sacred, and your death will be filed in triplicate and forgotten before the ink dries on the forms. In the end, there is no cure for the sickness that afflicts humanity in the 41st millennium. There is only the endless grinding of the machine, the perpetual recycling of hope into compliance, the transformation of every human cry for help into fuel for an engine that devours civilizations and calls the consumption holy. The body is a battlefield, but in this war, surrender is not permitted, victory is not possible, and the only peace comes in the form of ash scattered on the wind of a universe that has forgotten what it means to heal.